Knitting on a budget, 10 easy ways to save money when knitting. Hi everyone, Norman here. In today's video I want to talk about quite a couple of tips and tricks that will really help you save money when knitting. Let's face it, you probably started out knitting thinking you could create your own made-to-measure wardrobe on a dime. And then you saw that sweater quantities of a good yarn can cost up to $200 and good needles will set you back by 100 or more. So let's show you some saving tips. Saving tip number 1, find cheap alternatives for common knitting tools. If you go to your local yarn shop, you will probably see tons of cute little accessories and notions. And my videos are typically full of them as well. But as you start out, and even later on, most of these are just, well, eye candies. You don't need scissors that cost $200. A simple yarn snip from the dollar store will do. You could use an old tea kettle, a measuring cup, a takeaway cup, a pitcher or something like that as a yarn bowl. Or a simple folder with sheet inserts can turn into a storage for your circular needles. You can unwind your hangs around 2 chairs and use a simple tubular stick to wind your own yarn cakes. There is no need to buy an expensive yarn winder or Swift as you start out. A simple loop of contrasting yarn or a paper clip can be used as a stitch marker, and a towel on a carpet will help you block your finished projects. Some people will sand down chopsticks and use them as their first knitting needles. And a simple Ziploc bag like this one here can be a great project bag, especially for intarsia or Fair Isle projects, where you can just punch holes here through the plastic and pull the tail of each color through so they don't get tangled up. Comment below if you want me to record a dedicated video with smart knitting hacks like these, or maybe share your own right now. Now, of course, if you spend as much time on knitting as I do, and you do it for decades, then investing in good tools is certainly no mistake. But with the exception of knitting needles and yarn, using expensive notions typically will not result in a neater finished object. These accessories just look better or maybe let you finish a little bit faster, but that's it. Number 2, find free patterns. The second tip for knitting on a budget is certainly looking for free patterns. A good pattern can cost up to $10 and sometimes even more, and Ravelry.com is a great way to find these. There are special filters that allow you to narrow down your search, and there are well over 100,000 free patterns to choose from. Pick one that has good ratings and maybe one with more than just one finished project with pictures to ensure the pattern really works, because typically free patterns weren't test knitted or tech edited, while paid patterns typically are. Also, if you like a particular designer, make sure to follow them on social media or subscribe to their newsletter, because they often run sales, so you can pick up a pattern with a discount. Knitting books and magazines are also a great choice because they are often cheaper per pattern. So in one of these books there are often 10 or 20 patterns, so you will pay like $1 or $2 per pattern. Just make sure to check out the table of contents first, or the pictures on the back side, or Amazon typically has this preview function where you can see the first couple of pages to ensure that there's more than just one pattern in the book that interests you, because otherwise it might not make any sense money-wise. In that context, I have to mention that a lot of libraries have a do-it-yourself section. Also, there are actually a lot of historic knitting books available online for free through various websites like the Gutenberg Project, the Antique Pattern Library, and Open Library. At the same time, please don't forward or share patterns online or offline. Don't copy them or ask others to copy them for you. That is a copyright infringement, and yes, even if the pattern is for free, it really hurts a designer. And since most of them are struggling to make a living, it ultimately should be in your own interest to protect their interests, to ensure they will still be in a position to publish lovely patterns in the future. So please, always be aware that a free pattern is always a two-edged sword. Do consider supporting a designer or knitting teacher if you like their work. Otherwise, they might not be around in 1 year when you need them. For example, you can support my work on patreon.com and access special knitting tips and patterns. So maybe if this video helped you save money or you like my content, consider giving something back. A bit like an honesty box. I'll add a link to the description below. Number 3. Repurpose old yarn. Good yarn can cost quite a lot of money, and really it should. If you look at the facts, then you will quickly learn that trying to earn money with selling raw sheep wool is difficult, to say the least. In Europe, most breeders will actually throw away or burn the fleece, as selling it typically costs money due to the logistics involved. At the same time, the finished skein of yarn is often still very expensive and might be out of your budget. I do have to say that I feel we all need to accept that access to certain goods is no human right, at least if we want to be a little bit more sustainable. Cheap clothes, cheap meat, cheap holidays, cheap electronics are really at the root of 99% of our current problems. But that doesn't mean you cannot knit on a budget. You can always repurpose old yarn. It starts with simple things like unraveling old projects you don't wear anymore or have been gathering dust in your closet for ages. I know it can be hard, but also quite liberating, especially if you give that precious yarn a new purpose. And then of course you can go to a thrift store and buy secondhand sweaters and upcycle these. This can be a great choice for people who need sweater quantities of inexpensive yarn in a good quality. Now, you do have to make sure of 4 things. First of all, look for the label inside and pray that there still is one to see what it was made of. Feel the fabric. Going through all this effort for a pound of acrylic yarn might not be worth it. Secondly, you need to check the seam for 2 things. First of all, can you see the thread that was used for seaming? Because you need to undo that before you can unravel it. And then you need to ensure that the pattern wasn't cut from a larger piece of knitted fabric. And then in this case, you would see tons of tiny little tails peeking out. And because knitters would say it has been steeked. Because if the edges is all fringes, you won't end up with one continuous thread when unraveling, but rather thousands of short length of yarn, and that's typically not what you want. And lastly, don't pick something that is either so fussy or so worn that unraveling will be very difficult because the yarn already felted. So check under the armpits or around the hem. That's typically places where the fiber will felt. And of course, you need to make sure that you pick a yarn weight that is suitable for hand knitting. You probably don't want to knit with 1mm needles, though you could of course always use 2 or 3 strands held together, so that is still an option if you find a super nice fiber you really want and it's a fine thread. And here's one last tip in this section. On Kickstarter.com, you can sometimes also find people who want to start selling their fiber, and if you are an early supporter, you can often find great bargains. I found some great cashmere, yak or local sheep wool there for a quarter of the price you'll see at the store. But of course, it can be a risk because the business can fail or the quality not up to your standards. Number 4, buy yarn the smart way. You need to make sure that you buy yarn in an intelligent and systematic way. If you buy a single skein here and another there because you like the colorway and Susan got one too, well, this can often be very wasteful. First of all, there are only so many single skein projects. And secondly, even then you often end up with a lot of scrap yarn, and if it's all a different yarn base and weight, there's only so much you can do with it. Sure, there are scrap projects, but few of them are truly what you really want to knit. However, if you are a sock knitter or a shawl knitter or a sweater person, most people have one garment category they like to knit the most, and you only use a selected few different yarn bases and brands, you will end up with the same amount of scrap yarn, probably in a different color, but it will all be the same yarn weight and yarn base. And this means after, 5 socks or sweaters, you can use the scrap yarn to knit a lovely project that actually makes sense and doesn't look like fit for a scarecrow. On a side note, it also means you already know your gauge because you worked with this yarn before, so you don't need to knit another swatch all over again. So this will also save time and yarn. Also, in that context, do know that most local yarn shops allow you to return unused skeins. Emphasis on unused. So don't unwind a hank or even knit with it and then expect them to take it all back, or half a skein or something like that. But when you plan your project, scarf, hat or whatever you want to knit, ask them if you can buy one safety skein or ball that you can then return if you don't need it later on. Yard sales and eBay. Now, I don't want to spread the cliche because quite frankly it isn't even true. These days lots of young people knit. Still, thankfully, knitting is a hobby that people can continue doing up until the very old age. And eventually we all pass away, and often the next generation isn't all that interested in knitting. So all the yarn, the needles, the books end up on yard sales or eBay. And if you don't mind used or older items, this can be a very great choice. It may take a little bit of patience, but it is well worth it. And to be quite frank, most accomplished knitters have a lot of tools in their stash they never used, or maybe once or twice. So don't be surprised to find a mint interchangeable knitting needle set worth $100 or more for $5 or so. Yarn swaps. Most advanced knitters have a large stash of yarn. I am one of them. And often there are treasured skeins still waiting for the perfect project, and other skeins you absolutely needed to have when you saw it the first time, and then a month later or so you aren't all that excited anymore and you wonder, what was I thinking? So instead of buying new yarn, you can always ask other knitters to swap yarn with you. Maybe there is a local knitting group, or among your knitting friends. Ravelry and other knitting platforms are certainly an option as well, although it often involves shipping costs. So just define a date. Say in 2 weeks we all meet at this place and everyone brings the yarn they don't want or need anymore, and then you can swap or maybe agree on a price or so. This can be a great way to save money and manage your stash if you are an advanced knitter. Spin or dye your own yarn. Hand-dyed yarn can be very expensive. I have a list of well over 100 indie yarn dyers on my blog if you're interested, but a skein can often cost 20 or 30 US dollars. Expensive. It can be much cheaper to dye your own yarn, and with modern acid dyes and mordants, it's actually not even hard. Maybe a little bit messy, but if you are careful, it's certainly quite easy and affordable. You could even go the extra mile and learn spinning, a lovely hobby that allows you to put so much more of your personality into your knitwear. And as long as you don't buy special Rolex or special fibers, it can be quite a bit cheaper. Do know, however, that it requires an initial investment. So you need a spinning wheel, you need a little vat or pot to dye the yarn in, you need the colors, and they typically come in somewhat bigger containers. So it will only be able to help you knit on a budget long term. If you just want to dye or spin one skein, it certainly would be much more expensive, and of course you can also spend thousands of dollars on a spinning wheel, so a lot of spinners will also tell you that this is an expensive hobby as well. So again, you can do it on a budget, but it doesn't have to be. Number 8, yarn substitution. Another thing you absolutely need to keep in mind is yarn substitution. Often you buy a pattern and then it says 500 grams of DK baby cashmere yarn from over-the-top-luxury-yarns.com in the custom colorway, flush the money. Yarn snobbery is a real thing, and I do have to say that I am somewhat guilty. As a designer, when you spend so much time on knitting, so many years acquiring a stash, you tend to lean towards more expensive qualities, especially as your access to these fibers may be much easier. On top of that, you might envision a certain look and feel, and this leads you to a very specific fiber. So be careful to hold it against a designer when they use an expensive fiber. Still, that absolutely doesn't mean you have to invest a fortune as well. Yarnzup.com is an excellent website that allows you to search for most commercially available yarns, and it spits out an alternative with the same properties. But really, it boils down to what's the material, what's the yarn weight, and apply the yardage, and then find something with the same or near same properties. It's no rocket science, and basically just comparing labels. Number 9, interchangeable knitting needles. Some of you probably already own a set, but because some new knitters might be watching, I feel interchangeable knitting needles need to be mentioned in this video. These are sets that come with separate tips and cords, and you can combine them at will. So there are longer and shorter cords, and this will give you virtually unlimited possibilities. Of course, you can use these circular needles for flat projects as well, and the idea is you buy one set and then you will have the right knitting needle for every future project, no matter the needle size or cord length that is required. So if you have been knitting for a while and you know you want to continue this hobby for many years to come, then a good interchangeable knitting needle set can make a lot of sense. Of course, there is a flip side to this. If you only knit very similar projects, then fixed circular needles might still be cheaper, and also the joints won't ever come undone. It rarely happens, but it does happen. So if you typically knit with double pointed needles, if you never knit with size 8, 9 or 10, or never with those super small needles, then you will spend $100 or $150 on a set with 10 different needle sizes, but you barely use half of it, and then it might not make any sense either. So analyze your knitting habits before you commit. Number 10, don't buy to reward yourself without thinking. The last tip to save money when knitting is quite easy, but it still needs to be mentioned. With everything you plan to buy, ask yourself the following question: do I really need this? And then sleep a night and ask yourself the very same question in the morning. Do I really need this? Will this new needle, yarn bowl, project, bag, yarn, whatever, bring more joy to my life and help me knit faster, better, or neither? Or do I already own something very similar and the differences are minor at best? And if you don't have a definitive answer to these questions, then maybe you don't need to buy it. Modern marketing can be very targeted, especially on the internet. You search for yarn on Google, and in the following 5 days you'll see adverts for yarn and bargains and coupon codes and countdowns and whatnot hunting you on all devices. So the next tip is actually for anyone. Take a day or maybe even 2 and buy yourself a book. Marketing for Dummies or a primer on modern marketing, something like that, and go through that. You might think, well, Norman, I don't really want to work in marketing. Why would I do that? But really, once you know the basic tricks most marketers use to get you to buy things, you will be in a position to analyze your spending habits in a much better way, not only when it comes to knitting, but life in general. As humans, we cannot ignore bargains, even if we know they are not true bargains at all. But if we see 20% off, something in our brain stops working properly. And we also tend to leave the path of rationality under pressure. So if you combine the two and you say 20% off, but only until midnight, or only in the next 10 minutes, be fast, you will feel compelled to buy stuff you don't need. And then if you add a relatable component, some form of social proof, like an influencer you admire and respect, and they tell you, okay, look, these are the best knitting needles I ever knitted with, trust, and you can get these at 20% off using my code, but only until midnight. I tell you, 5% of you watching will click on that link, despite of the fact that the product manager priced in those 20% from the very start. So I'm telling you, researching a little bit on how modern marketing works will help you to save money. Anyway, that was my video on how to knit on a budget. If you like these tips, I'll add a video with 10 knitting tips for needle results up in here. Click on the thumbnail and watch the goodness. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.